He believed the night would break them. That was the certainty Varus carried with him when he gathered the legions and turned them north into the land the maps of Rome still marked as uncertain. Forests without borders, marshes without names, people without walls. To the Roman mind, this meant weakness, disunity, fear waiting to be used. Night was his ally. Darkness confused, scattered, softened the will. Steel, discipline, and formation did the rest. The order was given quietly. No horns, no banners. The legions advanced under a moon dulled by cloud, boots sinking into damp soil, armor whispering with every step. The settlement lay ahead, small, wooden, undefended, a place that should have burned easily. But when the first soldiers reached the edge of it, there was no resistance, no cries, no running figures, no blades raised in panic, only empty houses, fires still breathed low in their pits, glowing like dying eyes. Tools lay where hands had left them. Footprints led away, not scattered, not frantic, but deliberate. The people had gone into the forest, not in fear, but with purpose, as if following a path they already knew. Varus stood among the silent dwellings and felt no doubt. People fled. That was expected. Fear always arrived before steel. He ordered the camp set, convinced the forest would offer no shelter. Morning would finish what night had begun. He did not understand that the night was not his. Deep within the trees, beyond sight and beyond sound, the people gathered where the ground soft and the air thickened with water. They did not light fires. They did not speak. They waited beside a woman who had not aged the way others did. She did not wear symbols. She carried no blade. The earth beneath her feet was bare and cold, and she stood as though listening to something far older than the forest itself. Those who came to her did not call her priestess, and they did not call her witch. They called her nothing at all when strangers were near. Names had weight. Names attracted attention, and some attention could not be survived. When she began to sing, it was not a song meant for ears. Her voice was low, almost absent, a rhythm older than melody. Words without meaning to those who had forgotten the first language of the land. She did not call. She did not beg. She named what had already been broken. The boundary had been crossed. The ground heard her. So did the water. Far from the settlement, where the forest thinned into marsh and reed, the air began to move. Mist lifted, slow and heavy, coiling above dark pools that reflected nothing. From the water came a sound not sudden, not loud, but gentle enough to feel like memory. A voice that did not ask to be followed. It only waited to be heard. The legionaries were the first to notice it. Not the officers, not the scouts, but the men whose thoughts had begun to wander in the dark. A voice like home, like a mother calling from another room, like warmth remembered but never explained. They turned without orders. Varus woke to movement in the camp, quiet, wrong movement. Not the purposeful shifting of ranks, not the measured steps of men changing guard. This was a drift, a loosening. Soldiers rising as if they had been called by something urgent but private, their faces blank in the half-light. "Back to your places," the centurions hissed. "Hold formation." But formation was a day thing, a sun thing. Under this sky, the forest breathed differently, and the men could feel it. Even the veterans men, who had marched through foreign, Deserts and watched cities burn stood with their heads tilted, listening, as if trying to recognize a song they could not admit they knew. Varus stepped out into the damp cold and heard it for himself. It was not a clear melody. It was something between singing and weeping, a sound that rose and fell like water itself. It came from no direction and from every direction. It felt near, yet it always seemed to withdraw the moment you tried to locate it. He hardened his jaw. Superstition, he told himself. Folklore designed to scare children away from deep woods. He had seen fear before. He had used fear. He had learned how quickly a mind could invent monsters in darkness. Scouts, he ordered. Find the source. Bring back whoever plays this trick. A handful of men disappeared between the trees. They returned less than an hour later, only 3 of them, panting, soaked to the knees, eyes wide in a way that disgusted Varus. Soldiers were not meant to look like that. Not Roman soldiers. There are pools, one stammered. The ground, it gives. And the sound, enough, Varus cut him off. The road is ahead. We move at first light. He tried to pretend he did not notice how the mist thickened around the camp, creeping closer with each hour, swallowing the edges of the fires. He tried to ignore the way torches seemed to dim too quickly, as if their flames were being fed on by something unseen. At dawn, rain came. Not a storm at first, just a patient, relentless drizzle that turned earth into mud and mud into weight. Cloaks clung, leather straps slicked, metal cooled and bit into skin. The legions marched anyway, because Rome marched. Rome always marched. The forest did not resist them like an army. It resisted them like a body. Branches snagged helmets and pulled. Roots rose where there had been none the day before. Paths narrowed, forcing the long Roman column to stretch and thin. Orders had to be shouted, then repeated, then shouted again, because sound did not travel well in those woods. It died in moss. It drowned in wet leaves. And always, under everything, that voice. Sometimes it was a woman's voice. Sometimes it was several, braided together. Sometimes it was low enough to be mistaken for wind through reeds. But it was never absent, not truly. The men began to speak of it in whispers, and those whispers grew more dangerous than any enemy. By midday, the first man vanished. He was there one moment, stepping off the track to relieve himself, laughing at the rain. The next, his laughter cut short, as if a hand had closed around it. The column paused. Officers barked commands. Search parties went out. They returned empty. No blood, no struggle. No trail but footprints that led a few steps into fern and then ended, as though the man had stepped off the world. Varus felt a cold thread tighten beneath his ribs. He did not allow it to show. Move, he said. We are not here to hunt ghosts. It was then, late in the afternoon, that the first arrows came. They did not fly in disciplined volleys. They came from impossible angles, sometimes from ahead, sometimes from the sides, sometimes from behind. Men fell with feathers in their throats and eyes, and still Varus ordered the column forward. He ordered shields up, formation tightened, discipline restored. But the ground did not allow discipline. The further they marched, the softer it became. Mud sucked at boots. Wheels sank. Horses panicked. Men swore and strained and shoved, And the more they struggled, the more they tired, and the more tired they grew, the more that voice seemed to sharpen warm, intimate, coaxing. "Hold," the centurion shouted. "Hold the line." The line held for a moment. Then the marsh began. It did not announce itself with a clear edge. There was no boundary of reeds and water that would have warned a careful mind to turn back. The forest simply changed texture. The air thickened. The earth grew spongy beneath their steps. A wet scent rose, old water, old rot, a sweetness that did not belong to living things. Varus ordered a halt and watched his men. Some looked at the ground with suspicion. Others stared straight ahead as though the marsh were not there at all. A few too many leaned forward slightly, listening, their faces softening as the voice in the mist became clearer. It sounded like a promise, not a promise of pleasure, not even of safety, a promise of relief. Varus had always understood how to rule men. He knew their hunger, their pride, their fear. He knew how to offer them a future and make them die for it. But he did not understand relief. Relief was not a Roman virtue. Relief belonged to the defeated, to slaves, to the weak. And yet he saw it in their eyes. He realized with a jolt of shame that something here wanted them to stop wanting, to stop holding, to stop fighting, to simply lay down everything heavy and let it all be done. "Forward," he snapped. "We cross. We regroup on dry ground, dry ground." He said it like an assumption. The first rank stepped onto the marsh and did not sink at once. The ground accepted them with deceptive gentleness, like a hand that feels warm before it tightens. They moved slowly, poles probing, eyes narrowed. Rain trickled down helmets. Mud climbed their greaves. The column stretched thin behind them, men stepping carefully into the footprints of the man, ahead as if repeating the same step might protect them. And then the voices changed. They did not grow louder. They grew closer. The sound moved into the skull instead of the air. Men turned their heads as though someone had spoken directly into their ears. Some smiled faintly, like children hearing their name called by a mother they had not seen in years. A soldier near the front took one step sideways, away from the makeshift line, as if drawn toward a darker patch of water. "Back," a centurion barked, grabbing him by the shoulder. The soldier did not resist. He did not even seem to notice the centurion. He looked past him, eyes unfocused, and took another step. His boot sank. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just a slow, steady descent, as if the marsh were calmly swallowing him. The centurion pulled harder, cursing, straining, until his face reddened. The soldier's other boot sank too. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped, listening. And in that moment his expression softened into something almost peaceful. That was when the centurion panicked. He drew his sword and stabbed downward into the mud, as if he could kill whatever held the man. The blade met nothing solid. The motion only dragged the centurion forward. His own boot sank. Then another. Men rushed to help. Hands grabbed wrists. Arms locked. A chain of bodies formed, pulling back against the marsh. The Romans were good at turning people into machinery. The marsh did not care. The weight of their armor, their shields, their discipline, everything that made them Roman pulled them down. The chain tightened, bodies straining, and then something gave. A strap snapped. A hand slipped. The men at the front plunged forward. For a heartbeat, there were screams. Then there were only bubbles. Varus watched frozen as the ground smoothed itself over the place where they had been, as if ashamed of its hunger. No one moves. He roared, "Hold position." But position was a word for stone, not for this. The column behind, seeing men vanish into wet nothing, began to break. Some stepped backward, only to find their heels caught in suction. Others surged forward, thinking to escape faster, only to sink deeper. And always the voice. It did not mock. It did not cackle. It did not sound cruel. It sounded kind. That was what destroyed them. A group of soldiers to the left turned in unison, like worshippers answering a call, and walked calmly toward a patch of mist where the marsh looked darker. Their comrades shouted. Centurions ran after them, grabbing at shoulders, at cloaks, at anything. The men did not fight. They did not even seem afraid. They simply went step by step, guided by something they believed they deserved. The first disappeared to the knees, the second to the waist. The third tried to turn back at last, realizing too late that the ground was no longer ground. His mouth opened, and the sound that came out of him was not a scream. It was a sob, as if something inside him had broken with sudden understanding. Then he sank, and the marsh closed. Varus drew his sword, not because it would help, but because he needed to hold something that felt like reason. Build a path, he commanded. Cut branches. Lay them down. We move. Another volley of arrows cut his words in half. 2 men fell nearby, throats punctured, eyes staring. The forest did not produce an enemy. The arrows simply existed, and then did not. Varus saw it then. This was not a battle. Battles had fronts. Battles had opponents. Battles had victory conditions. This was an erasure. The voice in the mist rose again, sweet as a lullaby, and the men who heard it most clearly began to loosen their grips on their shields. Not because they were surrendering, because the shields felt pointless, heavy, childish, like dragging a door through water. A soldier dropped his helmet. It hit the mud with a dull sound and did not sink at once. The soldier stared at it, then stepped away as if relieved. Another dropped his sword. The blade fell and vanished immediately, swallowed without ripple. The man looked down, startled, then took a step forward in a trance, following the place where the sword had gone. The centurion slapped him hard across the face. The man blinked and smiled. "I can hear her," he whispered. The centurion's courage died in his eyes. Varus realized with a clarity that made him sick that steel was not power here. Steel was bait. Steel was weight. Steel was a gift offered to the marsh, and the marsh accepted gifts greedily. This was the land's law. What you brought would be taken first, and if you clung to it, you would go with it. Somewhere far behind, in the shelter of deeper trees, the people of the settlement listened. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. Their faces were tight with fear, not triumph. They had seen this happen before, perhaps not with Romans, not with so much iron, but with outsiders, with strangers, with those who came to claim what was not theirs. They held small things in their hands, not charms that cast spells, not talismans that made them invincible. Reminders, a twist of reed woven into a loop, a strip of cloth dampened in marsh water and tied around the wrist, a small piece of bark carried in the mouth so that no accidental sound would escape. Simple acts that said one thing to the place around them: we are not here to take. We are here to belong. The woman, the one without a name, had not moved since she began her low, steady chant. Rain streamed down her hair and shoulders. Her eyes were open but unfocused, as if seeing something far away and far beneath. If anyone had approached her then, they would have noticed something unsettling. Her voice did not lead the other voices. It merely made them possible. The boundary that had always been there, hidden beneath the ordinary world, had been recognized, named, heard, and once heard, it could not be unheard. Back in the marsh, Varus fought not a people, but an idea he could not accept, that the world might contain places where Rome was irrelevant. He tried to rally what remained. He tried to pull men into tight clusters. He shouted orders until his voice broke. But the voice in the mist did not compete with him. It simply went around him, through him, into the parts of his men that were exhausted and sick and longing for an end. The first night fell before the legions could escape. Rain turned to heavier sheets. The sky disappeared behind cloud. Fires could not be kept alive. Darkness pressed in, not like a curtain, but like water rising. Varus stood with the remnants of a cohort on what might have been slightly firmer ground, a hummock, a patch of reeds, a place that held for now. He listened to the marsh, to the forest, to the screams that came and then didn't. Sometimes the cries sounded close enough to touch. Sometimes they sounded far away, as if the men were falling in a different world. The air carried them strangely, breaking them into fragments, scattering them so that no one could be sure where help was needed. And then between those cries the voice returned, soft, patient, almost tender. Varus did something he had never done before. He prayed, not to Jupiter, not to Mars, not even to the abstract idea of Rome. He prayed to whatever listened in that place, the way a drowning man prays, not with faith, but with desperation. He promised offerings. He promised retreat. He promised he would never return. The place did not answer him, or perhaps it did in the only way it knew. It kept singing. At some point before dawn, Varus understood that what was happening was not simply a trap. It was a message, not spoken in words, but in consequences. He had come to teach a lesson of Roman power. Instead, the land taught a lesson of its own. Strength is not always an advantage. Sometimes strength is a handle by which you can be dragged down. At first light, a thin, gray light that made everything look like old bone, Varus made a choice. He could order a retreat, abandoning equipment, abandoning pride, abandoning everything that made him Roman. Or he could die as a Roman commander was expected to die, without surrender, without shame. He chose the only thing Rome had trained him to choose. He tightened his grip on his sword and stepped forward, not into battle, but into the marsh itself, as if daring the ground to take him. It took him, not with violence, not with drama, just with inevitability. Men saw their commander vanish, and something in them snapped. Some screamed and ran, only to sink faster. Some dropped everything and crawled like animals trying to reach trees. Some stood perfectly still and listened, faces calm, as if accepting a lullaby. And some very few did what no Roman wanted to do. They let go. One of them was not an officer, not a hero. He was a courier, young, lean, his hands more used to parchment than to sword. He had been tasked with carrying dispatches, with keeping record of movement, with being a pair of legs that could run when others could not. Early in the chaos, he had lost his weapon, not thrown it heroically, not sacrificed it with intention, simply dropped it when a fellow soldier stumbled, when mud grabbed his ankle, when he realized the extra weight could kill him. He had expected shame. Instead, he felt something like lightness for the first time in days. When the voice rose near him, he heard it clearly, and it did not sound like desire. It sounded like rest. It almost convinced him. Almost. A memory saved him, small and stupid and human. The face of his mother, the way she used to call his name from the doorway at dusk. How he always knew, even as a child, the difference between her real voice and the way the wind could imitate it through trees. That difference was thin, but it existed. He clenched his jaw and bit down on a strip of wet cloth torn from a cloak, soaked in marsh water, used not as protection, but as a reminder to keep his mouth shut, to keep from answering whatever called. He did not run. Running made suction stronger. Panic made mud hunger. He moved low, slow, crawling over roots, using his forearms to spread weight. He reached a fallen log and pressed himself flat against it, trembling, listening. The voice shifted around him. It tried, gently, to enter his mind. It offered relief in the shape of his own thoughts. He stared at the bark inches from his face until his eyes watered. He kept moving. When he finally reached ground that held him, he did not stand. He crawled farther, deeper into the trees, until he could no longer hear the cries behind him, until even the voice faded into distant, wet silence. He did not look back. He walked for 2 days, then 3, through rain and fog and a forest that seemed to rearrange itself behind him. He found Roman roads only, because roads were the only thing in the world that still felt arrogant enough to insist on being straight. When he reached the first outpost-mud-street, hollow-eyed, shaking, no one recognized him. He could not remember his own unit at first. He could not recall the number of his cohort. His mind kept sliding away from details, as if the forest had taken not only bodies but pieces of memory. They gave him water. They tried to ask questions. He answered with fragments. There was no enemy, he whispered at one point, and the men around him stared as if he'd blasphemed. There were arrows, but no enemy. He tried to describe the marsh, the way armor became a curse, the way the ground accepted iron, the way a mouth accepts food. But words felt wrong, too clean, too small. In the end, he said the only thing that came out true. We marched into a place that did not know Rome. The message reached the capital like smoke from a burning temple. At first, there was disbelief, laughter, outrage, rumors that Varus had been incompetent, that he had been outmaneuvered by savages, that he had been ambushed by men in trees. Then the names of the legions began to circulate. Names matter to empires. Names are how they count themselves. And when the names did not return, when there were no standards brought back, no survivors marching in defeat, no prisoners to ransom something cold settled over Rome, the city went quiet in a way it had not been quiet in generations. In palaces and courtyards, in marble halls where the world was normally discussed as if it were a conquered thing. People spoke in low voices. Priests lit incense and offered sacrifices, not to win victories, but to appease a fear they could not name. Augustus received the courier in private. The young man knelt on stone and tried to meet the emperor's eyes. He could not. Something in him still felt like it belonged to the forest, to the marsh, to the voice. What happened? Augustus asked. The courier opened his mouth. No answer came, not because he refused, not because he wanted to protect anyone, but because the truth had no shape that could fit inside Roman language. He swallowed and tried again. "We went to take," he said finally, voice cracking, "and the land took first." Augustus stared at him for a long time. Then, in a voice that sounded older than the city itself, the emperor spoke words that would echo in Rome like a curse. "Varus, give me back my legions." The courier flinched at the sound of the name, as if it carried weight. Augustus asked more questions about tactics, about numbers, about formations, about who betrayed whom. The courier had no answers that satisfied the Roman mind. He could only speak of fog and soft ground and voices that sounded like mercy. The emperor dismissed him, but the words stayed. The Senate declared mourning. Families who had sons in the lost legions wailed in the streets. Temples filled with people who had never cared about gods before, people who now needed to believe that something listened because the alternative was unbearable, that the world contained places where no one listened at all. Far north, the forest remained. The people who had fled their settlement returned after days, cautious, quiet, moving like shadows. They found Roman weapons, half submerged at the edge of the sea, Marsh shields wedged in mud, spears standing upright like dead trees. They did not touch them. They did not celebrate the death of strangers. They did what they always did when the boundary was crossed. They repaired what could be repaired. They spoke softly for a time. They taught their children not to answer voices at night. They left small offerings, bread, cloth, a cup of water at the reed line, not as payment, but as acknowledgement. The woman without a name stood once more at the edge of the bog in the early morning light. Her lips were dry. Her eyes were tired. She did not look triumphant. She looked as if she had simply watched weather pass. Someone, an older man, a leader by necessity, approached her and bowed his head. "Will they come again?" he asked. She did not answer, because in legends like these, the point is not whether the invader returns. The point is what remains. In Rome, maps were redrawn. Strategies were reconsidered. Pride was swallowed in small, bitter mouthfuls. The empire did not collapse. Empires rarely collapse from one wound. But something fractured quietly in the Roman imagination. They had believed the world was a thing that could be measured, labeled, disciplined, owned. They had believed that if a place had no walls, it had no right to exist unruled. Now they had learned a different kind of truth. Some lands do not resist you like men do. They accept you. They let you bring your steel, your order, your certainty. They let you step deeper and deeper until you have crossed a line that was never drawn on any map. And then they take what you brought first, not out of hatred, out of balance. The courier lived the rest of his life with a strange, quiet terror. He could sit in a crowded tavern and suddenly hear, Beneath the noise, the faintest trace of that voice. Not in a clear melody, just a softness in the air, a suggestion of relief. When it happened, his hands would go cold. He would clamp, his jaw shut and stare at wood, grain until the world returned to its ordinary cruelty. He never married. He never became a soldier again. He never walked near marshland if he could help it. He carried a small strip of cloth in his pocket, the same one he had bitten in the forest, still stained dark with old water. Not as a charm, not as a magical shield, as a reminder that there are places where the world is older than you are, and places where the world notices intent. Years later, when men in Rome spoke of the lost legions, they spoke like people speaking of a bad dream. They argued about mistakes and betrayals, about strategy and logistics, because humans need reasons that fit into language. But sometimes on cold nights, when fog crawled up from the river and street lamps burned with a dim, wavering light, someone would remember a rumor the courier had once whispered, and the room would fall silent. A rumor that the forest had not killed them. The forest had simply opened its mouth, and the marsh deep, bottomless patient had taken the iron that came to rule it. Because this, finally, was the warning that reached Rome and settled under its marble like a hairline crack. If you keep walking into with power in your hands, power will become the thing that drags you under. And the last thing you will hear is not hatred. It will be something gentle, something almost kind, calling your name the way home once did until you answer, and the world closes above you without a ripple.